Hello everyone, this is Michael, and today we're going to rank every album in the Faith No More catalog. Faith No More, as you may or may not know, was the alt-rock, pop, funk, rap, metal, thrash, disco, jazz, soul band that emerged from San Francisco in the mid-'80s. And if that sounds ludicrous, the reality is that I haven't even begun to list all the genres of music that Faith No More covered during their relatively brief career and their relatively limited catalog. Faith No More became, in the mid-'90s, one of the most influential bands of the alt-rock movement, with their genre-bending catalog and their sick, twisted, bizarro lyrics and dark themes. They were, like I say, totally unique, and yet many bands that came after them will claim Faith No More as a influence. And when I make these videos, I do my research, which consists of watching documentaries or reading books or articles online or whatever, but it also consists of listening to the music a lot. And I will admit that prior to doing this Faith No More review, I wasn't that excited about it. And the reason is this: is Faith No More is most of their content came from between 1985 and 1998. Since 1998, they've released only a single album of new music, which is about 40 minutes long. So in the last 26 years, there's only 40 minutes of new music. So all the music that makes up the bulk of their catalog is stuff that I've listened to 1,000 times. And so the idea of going back and listening to all this again, even though I like and love many of the songs, I've just heard them so many times, and like with anything, after you hear something a lot, you kind of lose your enthusiasm for it. And sometimes that happens on these deep dives when I do bands. By the end of them, I'm like, okay, I've heard enough of them for a while. Total opposite experience with Faith No More. Rather than me dreading and not enjoying listening to the entire catalog, I found myself and my love affair with Faith No More reignited. I was like, wow, these guys were even better than I remembered. And in fact, some of the ratings that I'm going to show in a minute, I'm going to say I didn't rate them high enough. I think they should be even higher. Now, let's talk about the band members. There were 3 band members that were there from the very beginning and all the way through the end. They've been on every single Faith No More album and have been in the band almost the entire history. This is Roddy Bottum on keyboards, Billy Gould on bass, and Mike Borden on drums. Those 3 have been part of Faith No More from the beginning to whatever they might be doing now. And this is important because at least Roddy Bottum is arguably the most notable songwriter in the band. He wrote a lot of music, wrote a lot of lyrics. Billy Gould, the bass player, also is part of the songwriting team, and he has contributed many songwriting and recording ideas. Mike Borden is on the drums, and I don't think he's as much of a creative force, but the tandem of him on drums and Billy Gould on bass make them a unique and totally amazing rhythm section that I think is one of the real keys to the band's success, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. In addition, by the time the Faith No More put their first album out in 1985, we have Jim Martin on guitar. The 3, Borden, Gould, and Bottom, often talked about how the band always struggled to have to find a guitarist. And so Jim Martin came on a little bit later, and he honestly is a heavy metal dude. That's what he liked. He liked the heavy metal. And part of, I think, the key to Faith No More's success is that all these different guys had really different ideas about the music that they liked, and they all had very diverse influences. And that when they brought that all together, it just a lot of different ingredients to throw into that musical stew, if you will. But it also meant that there was often tension within the band. These guys weren't necessarily the best of friends, but they created a unique sound because of this altered background. So what we're going to look at today, we got 7 full-length studio albums. In addition, I'm going to give my reviews on the bonus content of the 4 deluxe albums they have. We have 2 live DVDs. And when we all add that up, it's 131 songs and about 8 hours of music. Now, like I say, the band's first album came out in 1985, even though the origins of the band go all the way back to 1979. But in 1985, they came out with their very first album called WeCareALot. And as you can see, I don't like it at all. I mentioned that Ian Mosley is the... Ian Mosley, that's not his name, is it? I got him confused with somebody else. Chuck Mosley. So, as I mentioned earlier, Chuck Mosley is the singer on this album and the next album, and I can't stand his vocals. I cannot. In addition, the music is not there yet. They got a lot of crazy ideas and they're doing things, but it just doesn't appeal to me. And it sounds like, and finally, we have the production is really poor. It's not a well-recorded album. I don't like this. I'm not going to say a lot about it. I will show my grades for each of this. So the only song that I kind of like is Pills for Breakfast. But you can see we got 2 songs that I truly don't like at all, Mark Bowen and Why Do You Bother? Realize that 20, as I say here, is I'll do everything in my power to turn that off because I just can't stand the sound of it. I honestly, you know, We Care a Lot is the one song that's probably most notable from this album, and I give it a 60, but honestly, when I hear it, I don't really enjoy it all that much. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this album because I just don't like it, and because I'm not all that familiar with it, but I have heard it. I wanted to like it after I got into Faith No More. It's like, oh, they got some earlier albums. Let me check those out. And I was just so disappointed when I first got this. So I'm not going to say a lot about it because I just don't, for me, there's not value in spending time with it. Remarkably, the next album, Introduce Yourself, is even worse. And I just don't like the songs. I don't like anything about it. I don't like the sound of it. I don't like Mosley's voice. You can see what we got here. Notice they did We Care a Lot again. Introduce Yourself is only about a 2-minute song, and even that, I'm kind of reluctant to give it that 60. It's probably more like a 40. These are just not good albums. I think out of all the reviews that I've done of albums thus far, that the 35 is definitely the lowest score I've given any album, and I believe 45 might be the second lowest. I probably got 1 or 2 that are around that area, but for me, these aren't even really Faith No More albums. I know that there are people out there that are Faith No More fans that really enjoy the 2 early albums, and they obviously had some appeal early in the band's career, but they just do not work for me, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. Now, after the band, Introduce Yourself did have some mild success. They got some play on MTV, and the band was able to tour quite a bit. I believe they toured Europe. But as the tour went on, Chuck Mosley, the singer's behavior became more erratic, and he became less dependable, and eventually the band fired him. Now, they brought on Mike Patton to be the vocalist for their next album. However, he wasn't really given a full membership in the band. So what happened is they had written all the material for their next album, and they needed a singer because Mosley was gone. They knew Mike Patton. Jim Martin, the guitarist, knew Mike Patton from the band that he was already in San Francisco called Mr. Bungle. And Mr. Bungle, if Faith No More was wild, Mr. Bungle was wild on steroids. So he liked Mike Patton's vocals. So Patton was asked to come in and provide the vocals, but he was also asked to write the lyrics. So in the 2 weeks, they gave him the music, and he actually wanted to change some of the music, and they said, no, music's already done, we got all that, we need you to write lyrics and sing. And in 2 weeks, he wrote all the lyrics for their next album called The Real Thing. Then he went in and recorded all the vocals. And this is really widely talked about, but Patton purposely limited himself in terms of what he was doing vocally on The Real Thing. If you listen to the album, he does not use a lot of his range, and he is one of the most talented vocalists ever in the rock music genre. Maybe the most talented. I've read he has a 7-octave voice. I've never heard of someone with a 7-octave voice. I didn't even know there were 7 octaves. I'm not a trained musician. I'm not a learned musician. I'm not a musician at all. He does have a wide range. He's also hyper talented in terms of he truly can use his voice as an instrument, and he frequently does that, but not on this album. Instead, on this album, he kind of maintains a relatively narrow range, and he uses a kind of almost like a nasally whine throughout. And the reason he did this is he considered himself to be part of Mr. Bungle, not Faith No More, and he didn't want to like betray his Mr. Bungle bandmates by using all his vocal talent in this other band, which he thought probably was just going to be a one-off. Instead, Faith No More releases The Real Thing, and I believe it was released in 1989, but it was in the spring of 1990 when the song Epic became a huge, massive hit on MTV, and suddenly Faith No More was thrust into stardom. In addition to Epic, we had Falling to Pieces, and I forget what the third single was, but both Falling to Pieces and Epic were huge MTV, heavy rotation on MTV. Faith No More quickly started touring and traveling all over North America and Europe, and they were a phenomenon. And so Mike Patton was part of this, and so eventually it was just kind of obvious that he was a real member of the band as the band toured and all that. This album is often cited as the beginning of nu metal. A lot of the nu metal artists will trace their origins or influences back to The Real Thing. I don't really hear that. I mean, when I hear this album, I don't think of bands like Limp Bizkit. They don't, to me, sound any alike. And Mike Patton has famously said, "Don't blame me for Limp Bizkit." However, there are a lot of bands in Korn and those types of bands that all will pay tribute to Faith No More as being major, major influences. I'm going to read a few things. These are, as I was doing research, the way various peoples described the album, and it gives you a sense of just how wide-ranging and genre-bending it is. Faith No More is a band with a punk rock bassist, a classically trained keyboardist, a punk-funk singer, and a drummer who would probably rather be playing Ghanaian tribal music. I think that's actually accurate. Funk, metal, traditional rock, instrumental, and even a little easy listening. Veered from quasi-Middle Eastern orchestral churn to demented, creepy lounge singer irony to all-out blitzkrieg. I mean, it is almost impossible to classify this album, and that was one of the things that really appealed to me. Also, it's a nearly 60-minute album. This is one of those times the bands taking advantage of the CD format, not limiting themselves to 40 minutes. This video started with the very first song, From Out of Nowhere, and that's a pretty straightforward rocker, but one of the things that I think makes Faith No More really interesting is that they have keyboards that play a heavy role, not as accents, but that it's a lead instrument and it plays a integral role in the sound. And there aren't many bands that play heavy metal and hard rock and funk and punk and all these different genres, and then also have the ability to use these pianos and keyboards for, soft rock, things like that. And the other thing is, I mentioned Mike Borden and Billy Gould on the rhythm section, drums and bass. In Texas, we used to have a saying about bands that, they swing. And what that meant is the music made you move. Okay, and it could be rock music, it could be blues, it could be country or alt country or whatever. We would talk about, they make you swing. And Faith No More's rhythm section swings on almost every one of their songs, and it is a real key, integral component of the band's success and appeal, in my opinion. Our second song is Epic. Now, you see, I only rated it as a 60. I can tell you when it first came out, I thought it was awesome from the minute I heard it. And when Faith No More first emerged, that was the song that came out, and they were called by a lot of people a Red Hot Chili Peppers wannabe, because they were doing this rap rock, kind of like that Chili Peppers were, and they had funky beats. Mike Patton can run circles around Anthony Kiedis as far as singing. In addition, the palette that Faith No More is singing on there's no limits to it. They can play any kind of music, anything. So I don't think it's fair, but a lot of people made that comparison when the band first came out. Surprise, You're Dead. That's a no-holds-barred heavy metal song, and it kicks ass. Zombie Eaters, that's just it's like a 6-minute rocker, but it's got, it's told from the story of a child, an infant, who is just, her mother, the infant's mother is everything to the infant. And it's really, a good example of Mike Patton's unique lyrical abilities. And he really does write really interesting, sometimes dark, often twisted lyrics. The last song, Edge of the World, is... it's pedophilia fantasy, him basically, gooning over young girls. It's a dark, twisted song. We have a cover of War Pigs by Black Sabbath. Woodpecker from Mars is an instrumental, and it has a tremendous guitar sound from Jim Martin. It has a heavy metal sound, and yet it's complex and has a almost proggy element to it. I mean, we could go one song after the other. Every one of these is good. Many of them are great. Like I say, I might, if I were to go back, I'd probably give Falling to Pieces an 80. I don't think that's a 3-star song. That's a 4-star song. Underwater Love is definitely a 3-star song. I've never been a huge fan of that one. Epic, I mean, a lot of people would give that 100. I'm probably giving it 60 just because it's overplayed, and it seems like anytime somebody who is unfamiliar with Faith No More, they always cite that song. But overall, just a tremendous accomplishment. A genre-bending album, unique. Nobody had ever done anything like it before. Nobody's been able to do anything like it since, other than maybe Faith No More. It is limited, I say, by Mike Patton's self-limiting, him not using all of his vocal abilities. That's the only thing that I kind of give it a nick for, because I think if he had, it would have been even better. All right. So, as you see, that is an 88, and The Real Thing was a big, huge hit. The band toured extensively and all around the world. I know they did North America, they did Europe, and I know they did South America. In fact, they did like 30 days in Brazil after they'd been touring extensively already. And the guys talk about, while it was fun and cool to be touring in Brazil, by that point they'd grown a bit tired of playing the same songs over and over again. And they were starting to write new material for their next album. And the obvious thing to do the next album was to do The Real Thing again. And they just had no interest in that whatsoever. Instead, the band really wanted to kind of challenge their audience, and I think Billy Gould said it on one of the videos I was watching. He was like, "Oh, you like The Real Thing? You like that? Well, try some of this." And they purposefully wanted to, like I say, explore, be experimental, be extreme, and there's no doubt whatsoever that the album Angeldust, which came out in 1992, is both experimental and extreme. Now, I've got this as an 82. I can tell you this is the one specifically that if I went back, I'd probably give it a number of the songs higher grades, to the point that this would probably be more like a 90. Again, I'm going to use some of the words I read to describe the music on Angeldust: art damaged death metal, nerve frazzling apocalyptic rock, bizarro masterpiece, genre shifting theatric, schizophrenic vocals, complex beats, and nerve rattling apocalyptic beats. One of the key things I think here is that Mike Patton, unlike on The Real Thing, is heavily involved with the ideas, and he's using his voice to its full extent here. This is the album that really cemented Faith No More's reputation as a true innovator and a true artist, really. And I think that's one thing, that these guys are artists. The easy thing, like I said, would have been to do The Real Thing again, and that's what the record company really wanted. But they didn't. They went a completely different direction, and I can remember when I put this out, the CD, when I put the CD on, got it the day that it came out, I was so excited. I was a bit bewildered, but I also thought, wow, man, I'm going to be listening to this a lot, because you cannot digest it in a single listen. Let's go into the songs individually. As you can see, I like virtually everyone, at least an 80 and a few hundreds here. The one song I don't like is RV, and we'll get into each one of these individually. I think a number of these I would go back and rescore as hundreds instead of 80s. I'm going to check my notes here. So, I'm going to, because this is such a roller coaster ride of a listen from beginning to end. If you put Land of Sunshine on and Midnight Cowboy, this is a roller coaster, a sonic roller coaster that will take you on a wild ride. And I want to go over each song and specifically how I've talked about this many times about bands. The bands that I like are bands that can go dark and light. They can play fast, they can play slow, they can play loud, they can play quiet, they can play urgent, they can play relaxed, they can play angry, they can play happy. They got all the best music is able to cover all those different areas and then transition between them, just like that transition we just heard there. They went from this chanting heavy stuff to now we've got almost ballad-like or lullaby-like xylophones going on. We're going to get into these. We're going to do each one, all right? So the album opens with Land of Sunshine. And I'll say this, Land of Sunshine sounds pretty similar to The Real Thing. It's not that different. What you will note immediately, though, is Mike Patton's vocals are much more dynamic. In addition, the song starts kind of similar to From Out of Nowhere, the opener to The Real Thing, but when you get to the chorus, you're not getting a simple anthemic sing-along chorus. Instead, by the middle of the song, Patton is laughing like a true madman in the background, and he's got these layered vocal things going on, and you start wondering what the heck's going on, and that was a true sign of things to come, because every song, there's parts where when you're first hearing them, you're like, what am I listening to? And then the song ends with this really powerful start-stop kind of action. Great way to kick off the album. But Caffeine is when the band really kind of revealed it. And Caffeine I would definitely make 100 after listening some more. Mike Patton is in peak form on Caffeine. He is all over the place. He's got quiet. First, the song is really heavy song. It starts off. And then in the middle, you have this very quiet spoken word bridge. And then it transitions into crazy screaming heavy metal, like almost like growl type vocals, but not really. And then it goes back. It goes back from the heavy screaming vocals to the quiet spoken word stuff, and then back. And so you've got this amazing palette of sounds happening. The arrangement is bizarre. If you had to track it, it's not verse, chorus, bridge, outro. Trust me. it's these ability to combine genres, transition between them seamlessly, have a sophisticated, complex arrangement, an enormous palette of sounds. I mean, we got different sounds, different energies, different atmospheres. They're painting different pictures. They're eliciting different emotions. This is Faith No More. This is Caffeine is, to me, this is Faith No More saying this is what we're capable of, and they're playing at the top of their level. After that, we get Midlife Crisis. This is one of 3 relatively accessible and poppy songs on the album, and yet it opens with Mike Patton again just employing an enormous range of vocal sounds, vocal ranges, vocal what's the word I'm looking for? Phrasings. It can be overwhelming when you first hear it, because he'll have 2 or 3 vocals going on simultaneously, and they're often in conflict with each other almost. You can have clear, clean, happy vocals, and then in the background he'll have this snarling, lower volume snarl that's, rough and edgy. And I mean, this is the Mike Patton coming out party for me, this whole album. Then we get a bridge where it changes to a keyboard driven section, which slowly double times. That, and then that transitions into a super heavy sludge metal kind of sound. I mean, I feel like these guys have no limits on what they're willing to try, and then they're killing it when they do try it. That's what every song on here feels like, except for song number 4. I don't like it. I didn't like it when it first came out. I tried to like it when I went and started doing this effort again. I still don't. I don't like it's a country sounding, piano driven, almost ballad with these Mike Patton vocal vocals. I don't like the piano melody, and I don't like Mike's vocals on it. So I'm not going to say much more about that. Smaller and smaller. It's a mid-tempo, heavy, straightforward vocals. But then eventually Patton is screaming again. But his screaming is so well done. It's controlled. It's purposeful. It's effective. I do not like growling vocals, and screaming is fine. I don't like those growling vocals that a lot of the heavy metal, death metal, modern metal bands do. Patton uses it, but it's part of an entire palette of sounds. He's not just screaming. He's not just growling. The bridge in the middle transitions to this bass drum section, and then Patton is in the background doing Indian chants. Boom, 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 boom. And again, it just feels like nothing is off the table. I feel like there's no genre or type of music that the band's willing to employ, even if only for a section here or there. I'm reading my notes. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I'm saying there's no transition that's too bold or audacious to attempt. That's what I feel like. They could go from any sounding genre to another genre, and they'd figure out a way to make it work, and they'd make the transition seamless. There's no frameworks that the band's following. The arrangements are all over the place and outrageous. Next, we got Everything's Ruined. This is a relatively accessible song again. Again, Mike Patton's vocals on full display, range, tone, aggression. Like I said earlier, I like bands that have the ability to do black and white. Patton's able to do black and white with his vocals all over. There's no part of the canvas he's unwilling to utilize. And name an emotion, he can cover it. He's got the huge range. He's often using his vocals as an instrument, where it could be kind of an instrumental section or bridge, and he'll be contributing some kind of beat or rhythm to it. Just amazing stuff. And then we get to Malpractice, which is absolutely off. We are off in true bizarro world. This song is almost getting into Mr. Bungle territory in terms of just how crazed it is. It's switching from one kind of song to another, to another, to another, over and over again. My wife, who is a big Mike Patton fan, but she refers to him as the Carney guy. This song is one of the reasons she refers to him as the Carney guy. That it sounds like like if you were on LSD and went to one of those outdoor carnivals with the freaks and the crazy shows and all the zaniness that you see at one of those things, this song would sound like that. That's the song that we mentioned a little while ago. It starts out heavy and doing this crazy stuff and then transitions into a child's lullaby. I mean, that's just one of the many unexpected areas the band travels through on that song. It makes me think when I wrote this down when I was doing it, I was like, anybody who knows Hunter S. Thompson's writing, it's considered gonzo and it was drug-fueled and insane. Malpractice sounds like a Hunter S. Thompson song to me. Quintessential Faith No More, absolutely unique. Nobody's ever done anything like it first. Then we get Kindergarten. I'm not as big a fan of Kindergarten. It's kind of mid-tempo, and there's nothing about it that really stands out to me. It is a good song because it's got that groove that I was talking about, that bass and drum rhythm section, still giving us something to swing to, making us move, making us tap our feet and shake our booty. And it just seems like no matter what kind of song Faith No More is playing, they've always got that groove. What this song we're listening to now, Evidence, that's got a groove, man. Then we've got Be Aggressive. Oh my God, there's so many things to this. So it starts out with keyboards, but the lyrics are about rather rough and aggressive homosexual oral sex. Typical song content. And here's the reality is I used to think in the 90s, I thought Mike Patton was gay because there are a number of songs that talk about being gay or things like this. I don't think somebody who wasn't gay would talk about rough oral sex between two men. The reality is its keyboardist Roddy Bottum is gay. And he wrote this song, and he liked to write lyrics that might make Mike Patton feel uncomfortable. He almost would purposely write extreme lyrics just to see how far he could make Mike go. Mike is a real artist, and so he took that challenge on and did what he does. And there was always a bit of tension within the band like that. I once heard Jim Martin, the guitarist, described as the kind of person who, if you had a scab on your arm, he's the kind of guy that would try to pick it off and then stick his finger in it. And the reality is that Jim Martin wasn't, he's a heavy metal guy. He wasn't a huge fan of the direction the band went in with Angeldust, and he frequently called it gay disco. And in the documentaries or videos that I watched, he was never with the other band members when he was talking about the album, and he's like, well, if they call it Angeldust, it won't have anything, my fingerprints on it, because that's a dumb name. And he wasn't really too super psyched about the direction. We'll get to what happens there, so let's just keep going with the songs. Be Aggressive also has a famous cheerleader chant as the chorus: Be aggressive, be aggressive, beaggressive. Again, this is a song about rough oral homosexual sex. I remember going to pick up my daughter from school after school. She's in like third grade or something, and all the kids are singing "Be aggressive, be aggressive, be," and apparently it's become a fairly popular cheerleader chant. So now this is Faith No More's influence. 30 plus years after they released this album, we now have school-age children chanting their lyrics to a song about rough homosexual oral sex. That's That's true artistry right there. Then we get Small Victory, which is another fairly accessible pop song. It's got a straightforward arrangement. This is a good example. During the bridge, Mike Patton is using his vocals as an instrument. Crack Hitler, one of my favorite songs. Got these distorted vocals, heavy effects. It's got a high energy groove, and then it changes to a slow tempo with these chants. Really interesting arrangement. And then Patton is using his multi-layered vocals as the song ends and climaxes. And that's one of the things I forgot to mention, is that not only did Patton expand what he was doing vocally in terms of how he was singing, but expanded it kind of from a production standpoint. They would often have multiple layers of his vocals with him doing these different things, and then he would use his vocals as an instrument. And the production, I forgot to mention, the production on this is outstanding. You have a ton of samples being used, lots of overdubs, blending of all these different sounds and genres. It's just a wonderful sounding album. Next we got Jizzlobber. This is a good example of a heavy song but driven by keyboards. It's got almost industrial sounding effects with real heavy vocals and brutal guitar sounds. And then it's followed by a very proggy, heavy instrumental section. Sounds, you kind of sounds you hear in a band like Dream Theater or Haken or in some of the modern prog metal bands. And then it ends with a gothic church organ. I mean, who could do that? And then finally, we get Midnight Cowboy, which is a cover of the song from the 1968, I think, album, starring, I think, John Voight and Dustin Hoffman. I'm not sure about that. Don't quote me on who's in that movie. It starts off like it's from The Godfather. It's got that kind of sound to it. This is a very authentic and respectful version of the song. This isn't the band doing it ironically or I always say this: if you're going to do a cover, it needs to be different or better. And I don't think this is actually either one of those. And yet it's not different at all. It sounds very similar to the original version. And yet I think it's a perfect ending to this album. Remember I said that we went on a roller coaster ride listening to this album, and we've been up and down and maybe turned upside down and spinning around. But every roller coaster comes to the part where after you've done all that, you got the straight, no incline section that's kind of slow as you pull into the station. Midnight Cowboy is that. It's that slow, straight section after you've gone through all the zaniness that preceded it. It's a perfect closing to an album. And it's one reason I would give this album a higher rating, is because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. My ratings are basically an aggregation of all the ratings that I give the individual songs, but sometimes an album just works when you listen to it from beginning to end, and it works better. Angel Dust is that album. This is a masterpiece. It is extremely influential, totally unique, absolutely innovative, experimental, extreme, all those things. Just cannot say enough good things about Angel Dust. Now, despite critical acclaim and people now recognizing, or critical acclaim at the time it came out, and people now recognizing Angel Dust as a masterpiece, when it came out, was not received all that well. A lot of fans found themselves scratching their heads. There was no hit single, although, like I say, there were a couple songs that got some airplay, but it didn't. I think actually maybe in the long term it did sell more. I was reading. I think it's the best-selling album to date. It did better in places like Europe than in the US. Also, I mentioned Jim Martin was frustrated with the direction the band was going in, and his energy and contributions to the band waned during their tour. During the tour, they famously toured with Metallica and Guns N' Roses, a show I saw in Washington, D.C. I saw the band 3 different times. Mike Patton in particular and Faith No More, the band really didn't enjoy touring with Guns N' Roses that much, and there were parts of that tour they seemed to really enjoy, but there was also some times when they weren't too happy. Because anyway, I'm not going to talk about it too much because I want to talk about the music. So the end result was Jim Martin got fired after the tour and was no longer part of the band when they got together to make their next album, which is King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime. And you can see I have this rated as a 90. However, this album did not do well upon release. In many ways, the reason I kind of rated it higher than Angel Dust originally is I feel like it's a lot like Angel Dust, maybe not as extreme or as experimental, but it's got music all over the place. But I feel like the songs as a group together, they're a little bit more cohesive. We don't have the one, remember RV I didn't like on Angel Dust. We don't have any songs that I don't like. And you can see there are a lot of songs on here. And you can also see that the front half is almost perfect. We've got 6 songs that 4 are 100 and 2 are 80s. And then after, the final half is not quite as strong. I'm going to go through each one of these also because I really like them. Get Out. This is 2.5 minute thrash rocker, about as straightforward as Faith No More gets. Ricochet is classic Faith No More that combines various sounds and elements, and it shows their dark, twisted kind of humor with the line, "It's always funny until someone gets hurt," and then it's just hilarious. Typical kind of dark, twisted humor they use. Evidence. I do not understand how Evidence was not a hit song. This is smooth pop, almost jazzy, and Patton does straight vocals. This is him crooning almost. I love the song Evidence. I do not understand how it didn't become a hit. And they released it as a single and it didn't work, so I don't know what's going on. Gentle Art of Making Enemies. This is again a Roddy Bottum song about being gay, and in this case he's talking about if you're openly gay, it's the gentle art of making enemies. And I can totally understand that, especially a guy in the rock music business coming out as gay in the 90s. I imagine he had a lot of negativity that he dealt with. But this is an overtly homosexual song about the challenges, the difficulties of admitting you're gay, and it combines homoerotic sexual overtones with aggression and violence, just like in Be Aggressive. There's aggression, anger, violence all combined. Then we get Star AD. This features a lot of horns, and about the closest comparative, I guess, is if you went back to 70s prog era Frank Zappa. That's about what it gets, but of course it's uniquely Faith No More. Patton's vocals are just spanning the spectrum here. It's like there's nothing he can't do. Cuckoo for Caca is a very heavy song, and this again, Mike Patton, he has vocals here where he sounds like a truly deranged individual. I remember one time I was playing this in my cube at work, and this guy came over, and he liked a lot of prog music like me, and he's like, I was listening to Cuckoo for Caca, and he goes, "That guy sounds like he's insane," and I'm like, yeah, that's the point. And then we got, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Carajal Voador. It's got Portuguese lyrics. Mike Patton, by the way, seems to be able to sing in any language because I know he sings in English, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and German. Those are off the top of my head. I know he has songs in all 5 of those languages. I could understand if people don't like this song because it's pretty simple and it's not very developed, but I like it. It's got a cool groove. Like I say, it makes it swings. Ugly in the Morning reminds me of some of the Angel Dust songs. It's going from one genre to another to another to another pretty rapidly. Again, Mike Patton's vocals just all over the place. And when you emerge from the break, we have this quintessential hardcore Faith No More section, and then they just they go into a thing where they're repeating the same thing over and over, but it's different each time, especially Patton's vocals. He's singing the same line over and over again, but it sounds different each time. Dig in the Grave. This is another song that probably should have been a radio hit. I don't understand why it's not. It's got fast, hard beat. It's almost heavy metal kind of. But it's got an accessible hook, which you're not generally getting from Faith No More a whole lot. We got Take This Bottle. This is a country sounding song. Okay, I give this a 60. I'm torn 60 to 80. It doesn't sound like authentic country music to me, and that's the part that I don't like about Take This Bottle. But I also kind of like it because, again, it's got a groove. It's got a repetitive arrangement. I think that's why I rate it as a 60 as opposed to an 80. Then we got King for a Day. This is one of my favorite songs by Faith No More. It combines these kind of groovy 70s acoustic guitars, and it grows in volume and intensity. And then there's a part in there, right, about from 3 minutes to 4 minutes, 3 minutes to 3:45 seconds. It's just uniquely Faith No More. They built, the early quieter part, and it's built up, and then it breaks into this. I mean, it's just this cool bridge that's just quintessential Faith No More. And then the final almost 3 minutes is a slow fade out, which I normally would not be really cool with, but Faith No More, again, they do things that even I generally don't like, and they still pull it off and make it work. What a Day. I'll say this sounds like kind of a generic rap rock song that's mediocre, but it's got Mike Patton on vocals, and you've got this band that always has a smooth groove to it. So I think this is what those other new metal bands were trying to be. The Last to Know is not my favorite song. It's got this kind of monotone sound to it as a generic sludge. Just a Man, I would definitely change Just a Man to an 80. It's got this crooning soft rock opening, and then it changes to this faster bass, almost proggy, bass heavy. The bass becomes the lead instrument, and it's got this proggy theatrical background going on, and Patton uses these spoken word vocals, and it concludes with that repeating vocal melody sung against a gospel choir background, and then it has a long slow fade out to the end of it. This is a good use of fade out. I'm not a big fade out fan. I love King for a Day. I could put that on and listen to it from beginning to end at any time and not be tired of it. And that's what I discovered as I was listening to these things. I'm like, oh man, these are still great albums. Just killing it at this point. Like I said, I think if I redid these, I think The Real Thing I have about right at 88. I think Angel Dust is probably more like a 92, and I think King for a Day for me is like a 94. Now, King for a Day did not sell well, did not receive as much critical praise as Angel Dust had, and the band started splintering a bit. You had guys, Mike Borden was the touring drummer for Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne during those years. Roddy Bottum started doing this thing called Imperial Teen. Patton was getting married over in Italy, and so the next album coming together in 1997, Album of the Year, was somewhat unlikely. Like I say, the guys just weren't spending a lot of time with each other, and the writing got done kind of piecemeal in different places and then combined together. I will say this, Matt Wallace had been the producer of everything before. I'm not sure he gets a production credit on this album, and he'd kind of grown with the band. He was there in the very early days and helped produce their very first album. It had been the producer, and he got better as a producer the same way the band got better over time. But this time they started using Pro Tools, which was a new thing in the late 90s. Now, I give you a sense of how Album of the Year got wildly varying responses from critics. So, one quote I have is, Faith No More are floundering around desperately, groping for a sense of identity and direction in a decade that clearly finds them irrelevant. Another one, Album of the Year leaves one feeling like waking up and finding last night's used condom. Sure, the ride was fun while it lasted, but what remains is just plain icky, and you definitely don't want it in your CD player. Meanwhile, another guy said, should Faith No More call it quits, it would be nothing short of criminal if the band decided to call it quits. So, as you can see, I like it a lot. An 80, that's still outstanding, but not quite as good as Angel Dust and King for a Day. It's a shorter album. It's not nearly as extreme and experimental as Angeldust had been. It's a more straightforward album, and some of the songs sound like they're kind of regurgitating ideas that they've had from previous albums. So we'll look at it in detail here. You can still see that's a great album. Look at that. We got a couple hundreds, a whole bunch of 80s, and 2 60s. Not a single bad song in the list. I could listen to this album from beginning to end again. Now, Collision, to me, sounds a bit like the opener from the previous albums. Strip Search kind of sounds a little bit like Evidence, but it's got this cool change at the end that, again, it's almost like a prog thing, the way Faith No More will be playing one genre and then they'll switch to another. Naked in Front of the Computer and Got That Feeling. Is that what we're listening to yet? Hard, heavy, funky, typical kind of Faith No More doing that kind of stuff. And then a lot of just groovy songs in here, like Mouth to Mouth, Ashes to Ashes, Helpless. All of these are good. Homesick Home. If I were to give a song a 40 on this, that would be it. Pristina is a good closer, but not as strong as the closers that we had on both of the other on King for a Day and Angeldust, which I think were really perfect closers for each one of those albums. So I'm a fan of Album of the Year, but I can understand others who don't like it as much. Now, I mentioned that I saw the band 3 times. I had forgotten this until my friend told me the story. I remember I had a buddy who was big into Faith No More like I was, and I remember he had moved, and I'd helped him move on that Saturday, and there were a bunch of other people involved, and he had a girlfriend and their friends and everything, and they were all going to kind of hang out and relax and party. And I said, dude, Faith No More is playing at a club in downtown Dallas tonight. We can get tickets and we can go see them at this little club. It's going to be awesome. And I had to talk him into it. And he said the thing that, and I'd forgotten this, but he's telling me the story. He said, you told me we may never get a chance to see this band ever again. And so we ended up going, and we saw him play. And it was awesome. But I'll say this, Mike Patton is a challenge in terms of a front man. He's not about giving the audience what they want. I can remember at this particular show, and it was in a club that was wide but not very deep. And so it's like normally if you have a rectangular shaped venue, the stage is at one end of, the shorter end of the rectangle. Here the stage was at the wider end of the rectangle, so it's a little weird setup. But he didn't make eye contact that I saw with any member of the entire audience, the entire show. He looked out straight above the audience and did not make eye contact. At another Faith No More show that I had saw on the Angeldust tour at the Smith Center in Washington, D.C., that was the first time I ever got kind of beat up in a mosh pit. In fact, I wear glasses, and I did back then, and my glasses got knocked off and jammed into my ear. And I remember not being able to hear well for a couple weeks out of that ear. And eventually I managed to clean my ear out, and I pulled out a hunk of dried blood. So apparently I had bled into my ear. And then the other third time I saw them was when they opened for Metallica and Guns N' Roses. This was at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. And I went with a group of people, but I really wanted to get as close as I could for Faith No More because I was a little sinewy dude and I could get up close. And back then you could jump over walls and sneak down. They didn't have all the security that they have nowadays. And I did that, and I enjoyed Faith No More, but I never saw my friends the rest of that show. So 5 hours of Metallica and Guns N' Roses of me wandering around not being with my friends, so it wasn't the most enjoyable show for me, even though Metallica was really good and Guns N' Roses was okay. So like I say, the band moving in different directions. This album did not do any better critically or commercially than King for a Day had done. They're playing small venues in little clubs. They're not selling out arenas or anything like they did for a little while there. And so I forget, they toured quite a bit, but not extensively. And I think it was November of 98, they announced that they had broken up. And that was pretty much it for Faith No More. And was that way until I think in 2009 they got together and started touring and being more active and getting together. And when they did, it was the same three guys I mentioned originally, Mike Borden, Billy Gould, and Roddy Bottum, and then Mike Patton as the vocalist. And then they usually had Trey Spruance as the John Hodgson as the guitarist. He became the fifth guitarist. Trey Spruance played guitar in King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, but he never became a full-fledged member of the band. John Hodgson did. So finally in 2015, they get together and put an album out, and it's only about 40 minutes long. It's not as experimental or crazed, and it doesn't have that special, extreme sauce that we especially had on Angel Dust and King for a Day. But the songs are good, and Mike Patton is always awesome on vocals. It's a good listen. It's just not a big, impactful listen like we had with, especially, even The Real Thing. I keep saying Angel Dust and King for a Day, but even The Real Thing is really great. And so when we add it all up, we've got the 7 studio albums, but this period right here, these 4 albums from 1989 to 1997, if that was the entire Faith No More catalog, they should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They were totally unique. They don't sound like anybody else. They're killing it. They're playing every kind of genre of music. There's nothing they're unwilling to try. There's no sound that they're unwilling to make, and I just cannot say enough good things about that period of the band and the band in general, but especially those 4 albums. Alright, let's look at how my ratings compare to others. I always cite 2 websites when comparing my rankings. One is progressivearchives.com and the other is metalmusicarchives.com. Well, the progressivearchives.com crowd has decided that Faith No More isn't progressive enough to be included on their site, which is absurd. So I've only got Metal Music Archives to compare to. Now you can see that the Metal Music Archives, they think much more highly of the Chuck Mosley era than I do. They've got them as 60, 62, something like that, which is good. And then after that, they think The Real Thing is like an 80, so I'm a little higher than them on The Real Thing. They're higher than me on Angel Dust, which I think a lot of people are. Angel Dust is widely regarded now as the band's masterpiece and most epic opus. As I said, I think I'd have a higher grade now too. You can also see they don't think as highly as King for a Day as I do. Then Album of the Year, we have the exact same score, and then we're pretty similar on solinvictus. So you can see that basically once we get to the Mike Patton era, the Metal Music Archives crowd likes most of what they see. The lowest grade here is like a 75 or something like that. So big fans over there at Metal Music Archives. Now then, those 4 albums that I mentioned, The Real Thing, the albums from 1989 to 1997 that I think is the core of Faith No More's catalog. The Real Thing, Angel Dust, King for a Day, and Album of the Year. Each of those have been released as a 2 CD deluxe edition. And I was really excited about these because I know they have a number of songs that weren't included on the original albums, and then they have alternative versions, and then they threw some live stuff. So I was really excited about these when they came up. But we're going to find out that I don't think that highly of them. So the first thing, what I'm rating here is this second bonus disc that's included on these albums. So this 77 score is only for that second bonus disc, and we're going to look at it. These discs consist of 3 different types of songs. One is what I call a bonus studio. This is a song that was not on the original album in any form, shape, or form. Then we have alt studio, which is an alternative version recorded in the studio of a song that was originally on the album. And then we have live versions, and you can tell the pinkish color is for the bonus studio, the green is for the alt studio, and the blue is for the live. And these are actually pretty good. So the best thing here is the bonus studio song. So Sweet Emotion is a totally original song that didn't show up on the album. Cowboy Song also. The Grade is a instrumental that kind of sounds country-ish, and almost like a fiddle, but it works because it's well done. And then we get remixes of songs like Epic and Falling to Pieces and From Out of Nowhere. The From Out of Nowhere just goes on a long time. It just repeats a lot of the beats and stuff, and that's what a lot of these alt mixes will do, is they often have times almost like hip-hop beats to them, which I'm not a super fan of. And we've got live versions. We got a live version of War Pigs, which is very honest and authentic to the original. And then you can see the rest of these just live versions. So nothing really special in here that really stands out to me. Sweet Emotion and Cowboy Song are probably the two best things about it. And then we have the Angeldust bonus disc, and you can see I think even less of this one. And we've only got 4. There's a lot of songs here, but 4 are bonus songs, but they're just like, one is Easy, which is one of Faith No More's most favorite songs, especially over in Europe. That is a big song for them. It's, you know, it's a cover of the Lionel Richie song, or is it Commodores? I forget. It's genuine and authentic to the original, but unnecessary to me. Again, when I talk about covers, be different or be better, and I'm not sure this is. I don't know how to pronounce the second song, Das Nissenweiser. This is a real polka song. He sings German, and it's polka, and it's okay. As the Worm Turns was originally on one of those Chuck Mosley recorded Introduce Yourself or WeCareALot, one of those, and they do a better version of it here with Mike. We got a alternative version of Midlife Crisis. It's pretty good, but then after that, you can see, especially the live stuff, it sounds like bootleg. It's terrible. It's not quality live recordings, and frankly, I felt insulted that they sold me this. And The World Is Yours it says live. I'm pretty sure that's recorded in the studio, but that's a good song. So we have a few good songs here, but mostly mediocrity and stuff that we don't need. Same thing on King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, just not a lot here. The only song that's truly original that we haven't heard before is I'm sorry, I got it completely backwards. We have a lot of songs that were not included on the album. Things like Absolute Zero and Greenfields and I Started a Joke, which is a cover. Spanish Eyes, I Won't Forget. They made the right decisions on which songs to include on the King for a Day album, because a lot of these songs just don't snap the way the primary studio content does. It's a lot of new music, and then we get 2 live songs. These at least sound better, especially the Gentle Art of Making Enemies. Whatever show they recorded that from, that's what we need their live stuff from. We have a version of Evidence in Spanish, and we also have a version of Evidence in Portuguese, with Mike showing off his ability to sing in different languages. And then last, we have Album of the Year, and you can see, again, I think similarly of it. Now, this is a shorter one. We've only got, 8 songs here. 2 are live. Those are actually good. This Guy's in Love with You. That's a cover of, I think, an Engelbert Humperdinck song. Again, genuine, authentic. It's a crooning ballad from the 70s. I'm pretty sure that's not live. That's a studio version. I think I got that wrong. The Last Cup of Sorrow alt version is good. Light Up and Let Go is an original that's good. But beyond that, So I was really pretty disappointed in what was contained on these bonus discs. You added up, and I think we came out with about 6 or 8 songs that are really good. So it's a bit disappointing to me that that's what we got on those deluxe editions. And then finally, the band doesn't have an extensive... I don't think they've ever released an official live album. Maybe this Brixton Academy show was released as a CD, but these are DVD versions. So Brixton Academy is on the Real Thing tour. This is them at their kind of rap rock, funk metal looking time. Mike Patton, again, like I say, on stage is a bit of a challenge as a front man for me. He does things like fart into the microphone and He can kind of be a dick on stage, honestly. I read this. He's partnered with Buzz Osborne from the Melvins on a number of projects. And the Melvins have been involved with tours with Mike Patton where he's doing other things non-Faith No More. I haven't talked about this, but Mike Patton is engaged on about 175 different projects. He's done an Italian opera. He's done totally experimental albums that he made in his hotel room that consisted of nothing but him and his vocals. He's been in numerous bands that are too numerous to mention all of them. Bands like Fantomas and Tomahawk. He's contributed to bands like Dillinger Escape Plan, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I forgot what my point was. Oh. I remember him telling a story about they were playing a show and the Melvins were opening for them, and the audience didn't like the Melvins and they booed them, and Mike was backstage and he got angry about that. So when he went on with his band, the band that the audience was there to see, that they had taken time to go to the show, spent their money, and they're there ready to see a show featuring Mike Patton and whatever band he was playing with that day. But Patton was angry that they had booed the Melvins, and so he went out and they did 40 minutes of noise on purpose. That's not professional, okay? I don't appreciate that. I love Mike Patton as a singer. I admire him as an artist, but he can be a bit of a prick at times, okay? The Brixton Academy show is great because it's them doing their Real Thing type stuff. You get almost every song from that album. It's competent and you get the power of them. I like Jim Martin on the guitar. They're a really powerful live band, but they're it can kind of depend on what mood Mike Patton is in and whether you get a guy who's giving you what you want to hear, a guy who wants to challenge you as an artist. Hellfest is more of a straightforward show during their kind of comeback tour. It's recorded in the Hellfest Festival, which is in France, I believe, every year. And it's pretty straightforward presentation. Nothing special, though. It's relatively short, about an hour and 15 minutes, I think. I'm not sure this is an official DVD. I think it's a bootleg, but it looks pretty good and sounds okay. But I wanted to include these just because it's the only thing outside of their 7 primary studio albums we really have. It's the only thing we really have in terms of live material. So, that's it. That's everything I have to say. Oh, I kind of messed that up. I wanted it to go. There we go. Nice smooth fade. So, again, I can't say enough good things about Faith No More's catalog in that prime 90s period. They were one of my favorite bands then, and this act of going back and revisiting their catalog has really re-enthused me about their music and their legacy. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe. I'd really like to try and get more viewers, more subscribers. So if you really want to go crazy and spread the word, maybe link on social network of your choice. All right, enough of my begging. Thank you guys. See ya. I'm out.